WARDOGS, the latest hotness in the tactical FPS world, just had a beta weekend that saw overwhelming numbers of active players, dwarfing that of Battlefield and even Call of Duty. And there's been a lot of hype around this game. The design, I think, is what's really attracting players to it. The idea that you can play different roles and be properly rewarded for those roles, whether you're a combatant or a helicopter pilot ferrying people to and from battle, or somebody who's working in logistics. You will get rewarded for each activity, and this makes the battle feel much more realistic and also varied in type of what types of skill sets and thinking that it rewards, as opposed to the standard Call of Duty or Battlefield where you're just being thrown in to essentially kill as many of the opponents as possible. Now, that is, of course, a major factor of WARDOGS. The overall game mode is essentially King of the Hill, where 3 different teams try to get as many of their soldiers into this central ring area. The team that has the most soldiers in there will start to tick up points for their team. And so obviously the game objective becomes a bit more, kill the enemy so that there's less of them and more of us in the circle so that we win. But there's so much nuance to that formula that the battles become quite varied, and your strategies can range completely from being a bush camping sniper, somebody driving a logistics truck, or somebody who's just building bases. Now, I got to play a bit over the weekend, not as much as I would have liked to. It was a limited playtime event and I had a fairly busy weekend, but I got enough time in to build some first impressions and kind of relay some of that information to you guys. The first and most important thing I want to talk about is whether or not this is something that a Battlefield player would be interested in. I think I saw a lot of people come over to this game thinking it was going to be a fun, sort of slightly more tactical version of Battlefield, which I would not describe this game as that. I would say it's a more accessible version of Squad or ARMA. And anyone who's played both of those games will know that there is a massive difference in the pacing between those two titles. And in WARDOGS, the pacing is much closer to the hardcore tactical milsim group. It's just a little easier to get into it. You don't feel like you gotta watch a ton of YouTube tutorials to figure things out. You can kind of jump in, start having fun and contributing right away. But you might play a round that lasts well over an hour and only have a handful of kills or engagements by the end of it. That said, you might still find that that time spent in the round was really rewarding and enjoyable. For example, I spent a lot of time just ferrying people into combat using a helicopter. I was getting more comfortable with the helicopter controls, and it was just fun dropping guys off. Sometimes we would drop in combat, people would die, I'd have to start medicing people, things would get hot and intense, but I was getting rewarded for dropping people off in combat, ranking up my piloting skills, getting more cash to spend. And the reason why I felt my time spent just transporting troops around was so rewarding is because the game was rewarding me for it. This is kind of the big thing that sets WARDOGS apart, is its cash economy system. So basically the way it works is if you are contributing to your team in a meaningful way, and there's a ton of different ways you can do that, you will be rewarded with cash. You can then spend that cash on permanent unlocks for your character that will carry over between rounds, or you can spend that cash on weapons and vehicles in that specific round that will only last for that round. But those weapons and vehicles can help sway the tide of the battle, and they can also help you earn cash at an even faster rate. So while I was transporting players into the combat region, I would get a whole bunch of cash for delivering them successfully into the zone. If they survived that deployment, like I didn't just drop them off in the middle of a open field where they just got sniped and they actually make it to cover and live a little bit, I then get some survival cash. And if they then go on to do more things like capture objectives and kill other enemies, I start to get a trickle down effect from that as well. So being an effective transport pilot can actually be quite rewarding. But the economy of the game shifts dynamically. In one round where I was one of the few transport helicopter pilots, I was getting more points. And in another round when there was like 4 guys ferrying people back and forth, each with their own helicopters, we all got way less points because we were sort of splitting up how many people were getting ferried in each time. So you do still need to approach the game with more adaptability in mind. You can't just say, I'm going to be a chopper pilot every round and expect to make tons and tons of bank. It actually makes me think of sort of the squad style systems where they have a limited number of roles per squad, so there can only be a handful of snipers per team, for example, and that's sort of an artificial way of limiting how the game balance works. In this game, they're trying to make it more naturally balanced, but I think that will be one of the harder long-term challenges of WARDOGS. In its current state, it is very challenging to get a read on what the overall balance is going to be like because, first of all, everybody we were playing with just didn't have a lot of high-level unlocks. And second of all, well, there was a lot of snipers and a lot of long-range combat, and it's hard to tell if that's how the game is designed to be, if that's how it's going to be once people start getting tons of the high-level unlocks, or if this is just some sort of weird interim state that we're all playing in before everything sort of mellows out with a more established meta. Now, approaching WARDOGS in the most traditional FPS mindset of taking an assault rifle and getting into combat and trying to fight people, it was fun. Graphically, it's not that impressive of a game, but the performance was good, so I would much prefer decent performance over amazing graphics, and I'm glad that they leaned in this direction to start off with, which gives them plenty of room to sort of dial things in as they progress with the game. The time to kill does feel pretty fast, although I think a lot of the enemies I was engaging weren't wearing the high-level armor yet, so that meta and balance is something that is still a bit up in the air for me to judge. In terms of just running into combat and finding combat, this is where the game can get a little frustrating, especially if you haven't played games like Squad and maybe don't know how to approach it yet. Because this game has a pretty high risk, high reward scenario set up with the cash. If you spend a lot of money on your kit, you don't want to die, so you play very conservatively. A lot of players are hanging out in buildings, they're not crossing open fields and kind of baiting you out to engage them somewhere. It's all sort of cover to cover fighting, hiding in the tree lines, staying out of the obvious engagement spots, which on one hand is realistic and cool that the game naturally simulates those realistic player behaviors. On the other hand, it can be a little frustrating when you just want to get into some good FPS combat. It might be a little bit more challenging, or you might really have to think about how to move around a map to get those flanks to close in and then have that engagement. And the engagements themselves can last for much shorter periods of time. So you might spend 70-80% of the time moving around setting up a fight, and then only 20% of the time in that actual fight, and then moving on from there. So the pacing is very, very different from, say, Battlefield, and it might not be everybody's cup of tea. If you play Squad or ARMA and you enjoy that, then you'll almost certainly enjoy it here. If you don't enjoy that from Squad or ARMA, then, well, it could be a deal breaker for you here as well. And I've seen that with some players out there who are coming into this thinking that it's going to be more like Battlefield and coming away disappointed. There are plenty of moments where I got ferried into combat after a lengthy helicopter or car ride and then promptly got shot and then had to do it all over again. That could be pretty frustrating, but you start to learn how to move around and mitigate those risks more. And then when you do get into combat and you start wiping squads or having a really good engagement where you're like, dang, we just sent those guys all the way back to HQ. They're going to be livid. Like, we just own them. That was awesome. Those battles and moments become more meaningful. So yes, slower pace, but more meaningful combat. And I think that's what a lot of gamers here are really craving, and WARDOGS does a fantastic job of it. Now, outside of the cash economy, the other thing that WARDOGS does exceptionally well, and for whatever reason it's taken the milsim genre this long to do this, is to make the game more accessible. ARMA Reforger took a good step in the right direction. WARDOGS is taking several steps further. They have a decent tutorial system, a good explanation of how the game works, and the interfaces and mechanics for healing and resupplying and just the general logistics are straightforward. There isn't 50 menus you got to open. There isn't all this kind of hidden knowledge curve stuff that you got to learn. It's all kind of intuitive and easily learnable in game, which is fantastic and very unusual. Now, I have a few light critiques and or concerns about WARDOGS, and we'll have to see how the game evolves post-launch. One of my critiques is that despite the game generally feeling more tactical and more methodical and like moving with squads and stuff has more purpose to it, The team objectives still feel a bit chaotic. I don't feel a huge amount of cohesion with the overall team or what we're pushing for. Globally, it still feels all over the place. Like you just have random squads going for random objectives, and I just didn't feel a lot of team cohesion. Maybe there is some stuff behind the scenes that I'm not yet aware of, but in general, it kind of felt like the same level of organization that you would get out of a conquest mode of Battlefield. And in Battlefield, it's more acceptable because of the game's just casual nature. Few people are paying attention to whether or not you win or lose. And kind of in WARDOGS, I felt similarly. It's like we're all just sort of in there to have our combat moments and get cash, but I didn't feel a real sense of cohesion or whether or not the team was doing well or what we should do as a team to try and fix our strategies or whatever. It all just kind of was happening, and then the round ends. Now, one of my concerns for WARDOGS is kind of the longevity of the game. It's kind of the hot new thing right now, but we have what feels like a fixed progression tree in game. So once you unlock all the vehicles and kit that you want, and you're not really spending cash on big unlocks, there could be sort of one, a lack of incentive to continue playing the game, but two, a pretty big imbalance with how that cash is now being hoarded and spent in game. The meta could rapidly evolve, and I'm not sure if the devs are fully prepared for what the game is going to turn into or how things are going to evolve over time. It's really fun right now, but I can't deny that a lot of my draw to play the game during the beta was to unlock new things and see what the next vehicle or weapon were like and progress my character. Once that progression tree is gone or too slow or no longer that enjoyable, am I going to still have the same drive to hop into a fairly long, slow-paced round? So that is a concern for down the road. We'll have to see what the devs' plans are. I know they do have some plans, and they seem to be very aware of all the things going on with their game. So I am excited to see what happens, and I'm very excited for the launch of this game as well. I think it's definitely worth checking out, but just keep in mind my warnings that this is not a Battlefield game, and you need some time to sit down and play this one. You're not just going to hop on for a quick 10-minute session. It's an afternoon, to say the least. I hope you guys enjoyed this first impressions video of WARDOGS. And up next, check out this other AA indie studio FPS, Hell Let Loose Vietnam. This one actually surprised me by just how incredible the graphics were and how surprisingly fun a Vietnam era FPS could be. I've played many in the past, but this one is definitely my favorite. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time. This is Level Cap, signing off.